only mode.
Okay. Okay. So the special board meeting, I'll prepare the board recording. It is Tuesday, June 22nd, 2021. It is 5:09 p.m. Meeting is called to order. Warren, do you have any unfinished business?
No, Mr. Chairman.
Have presentation?
Just, the audit,
Yeah.
presentation, the audit.
The auditors are on the line.
Others are online?
Yeah.
They can start anytime.
Yeah, hi everyone. This is Joe Kim. I have kind of an echo. Not sure if it's coming through clearly or not.
Yes, you're coming through clearly for us.
Oh, great. Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Joe Kim, the engagement partner. I just wanted to basically say a couple of things up front. Thank you again. Another year has kind of come by. Unfortunately, I missed, the field work part of the job because I was elsewhere. But Kent and team took care of everything. I think the good news is that the opinions will all be unqualified or unmodified, which is good news with respect to the financial statements, with respect to the single audit. Again, a clean opinion on the PFC compliance as well. No internal control matters or compliance findings. So, having said that, I'll turn it over to Kent to go through the bulk of the presentation.
Great, thank you, Joe. Good evening, everybody. Again, my name's Kent Stancliffe. I've been auditing the authority for about the past 8 or 9 years now. So again, last year we performed the audit remotely. We were able to make it up there this year, so it was great to meet Patty and work with Steve this year. And it was a great audit this year. So I'm going to just move through the financial statements here. I'm going to start off with the independent auditors report. So within the independent auditors report, the first thing to note here is the management's responsibility for the financial statements. You'll note that management is responsible for the preparation and fair presentation of the financial statements. Then the next thing is the auditor's responsibility. Our responsibility is to express an opinion on those financial statements. Then within the auditor's report, the most important thing to note is in the opinion, and that's going to be at the top of page 2, where it states, in our opinion, the financial statements referred to above present fairly in all material respects. So this is what we consider a unmodified opinion or a clean opinion. Moving on there, it talks about some required supplementary information that's due to the OPEB liability and the pension liability that's recorded. Then some other information. The other information talks about the schedule of expenditures of federal awards. And then on page 3, we talk about the government auditing standards that were applied to the audit. Now, pages 4 through 13, or I'm sorry, 4 through 8, that's the management discussion and analysis. This is where management gets to provide its analytical comments with regard to the financial statements. Moving on here to the statement net position, the first thing to note here is that cash and equivalents increased up to about $717,000. The statements of cash flow, that's going to be on page 13. That's going to show how you got from $124,000 to $717,000. So that's $651,000 that was used in operating activities, about $422,000 used in capital financing activities, and then net cash provided by investing activities of about $1.6 million. So you could safely say that the majority of the reason for your increase in cash is due to the CARES Act that was received for the airport, as well as the Paycheck Protection Program. So then moving on here, More significant items, $170,000 in accounts receivable. The majority of those accounts receivable are due for the industrial park lease rents and then some activity that was taking place at the marine terminal. There's about $187,000 in grants receivable. Within that grants receivable, about $160,000 due for that FAA CARES Act, and about $26,000 due from the New York State Department of Transportation. Moving on here to more significant items, the $124,000 in the compensating balance account. You want to note there that in note 11 and again in note 8D, that compensating balance account should be $200,000 in order to be in compliance with the debt covenants. We did note that subsequent to year end, there was an additional deposit that was made to get that balance above $200,000, so the authority was in compliance. Then moving on here, capital assets went up about $10 million. The majority of the reason for the increase in the capital assets was the Tiger grant, that's the bridge painting project, as well as about $6 million that was spent for the harbor deepening. Also to note here, deferred outflows of resources for pensions and OPEB, about $1.3 million in deferred outflow of resources for pension, about $166,000 for the OPEB. Now on page 10 there, liabilities. Nothing really significant here. The most significant thing to talk about here is the addition of about $2 million for a line of credit to provide working capital for the bridge project. None of that is reported on as a liability on the statements of net position at your year end. There was a zero balance on that account. More significant items to note here was that there was a suspension of payments for 3 months on some of the notes payable during the year due to COVID. And then again, moving down here to this net pension liability. Last year, there was about $441,000 in that net pension liability. This year, there's about $1.6 million recorded in that liability. Most of that just has to do with the change in the actuarial assumptions. And you can find more of that detail in note 9B.
Excuse me. Before you go on, I have a question on 9. You might have just answered it on the pension. The difference between the $545,000 in 2020 and the 1.3 in 2021. Is that what you're referring to?
I was referring, there was $441,000 for the pension liability in 2020 and $1.6 million in 2021.
Yeah, Kent is on the liability side.
Yeah, that's about halfway down on the liability side. So that's page 10.
Okay.
Yeah, but basically what happens is the state goes through on an annual basis and does a valuation of the pension assets. This year, they did the valuation actually as of March 31, 2020, about 2 weeks after the pandemic started, and investments pretty much were as low as they could go at that point in time. So there are two factors working here, is how they valued the investments and then the discount rate that they use. They took the discount rate and decreased the discount rate, which in essence drove the liability up. They offset that against the a reduction in value. So what you're seeing is pretty much a significant increase in the liability, and that's your piece of the statewide pension liability, and it's reflected accordingly. And that's why you see on the other side of the balance sheet there, that didn't all run through expense in fiscal 21. That's why you see the deferred outflows of resources went from 500 and something thousand dollars to $1.3 million because they pretty much used that deferred outflow account to kind of smooth the income statement effect of the increase in the liability.
So any, public entity would have had the, same increase then, pretty much.
Absolutely. Yep, that's a statewide issue. That's an Ogdensburg issue. That's a Empire State Development issue. That's any school district, any town, any county, any city. It's across the board. That's basically you're going to see the same thing, a massive increase in the pension liabilities that you have no control over. You know, that is a number on your set of financial statements that you have zero control over. Basically, the controller says, here's what you pay. You pay what the controller's office says, what the state says. You have no control over it beyond that point.
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, so moving on here, just your current ratio, that is your current liability or current assets divided by current liabilities. It's about 0.25 to 1 this year. Last year was about 0.17 to 1. Any current ratio should be over about 1 to 1. So there's definitely some concern with your current ratio there. Also note here, the working capital deficit is about $3.3 million this year. So the working capital would be your total current assets less your total current liabilities. Now moving on, page 11 here, statements of revenue, expenses, and changes in net position. First thing to note here is you'll note that bridge tolls decreased about $1.9 million. That's from $2.9 million down to about $946,000 this year. And I'm sure that you know the reason for that decrease is a decrease in traffic. Port operating fees increased about $596,000. That was due to some additional activity that was taking place at the marine terminal. And airport fees and services decreased about $82,000, as I'm sure you would know and expect due to travel restrictions during the pandemic times. We also noted salaries and wages decreased about $68,000. Most of that's due to fewer employees that the authority had on the books. Payroll taxes and related expenses increased about $422,000. You would expect with a decrease in salaries expense that payroll taxes and benefits would decrease. However, health insurance expenses increased, workers' comp premiums increased, and then there were some of those GASB 68 adjustments, some of those pension liabilities that Joe talked about before being pushed through the income statement. Parking lot operations expense decreased about $180,000. As you would expect, again, parking revenue decreased from about $299,000 down to about $8,000. So of course, parking lot operation expense would decrease as well. Professional fees increased about $455,000. Most of that increase is due to an agreement with strategic development specialists. And then there were some additional legal fees that were incurred by the authority this year. We also noted here in the expenses that special handling equipment expense increased about $113,000, and that would be consistent with the increase in the marine terminal activity and the respective revenue there. So now moving on to page 12 here to some of the non-operating items. Federal and state grants was about $13 million this year. Most of that was the Tiger grant, and then some New York State Department of Transportation funding for the harbor deepening project was picked up there. CARES Act airport grants, about $1.6 million. I talked about that a little bit before in the statements of cash flow. And then grant income for the Paycheck Protection Program. Part 1 is being picked up on your income statement. to the tune of about $430,000. And then part 2 that has yet to be forgiven is being recorded as debt. So now moving on to the notes to the financial statements here. Note 1 just talks about the organization. Note 2 talks about the summary of significant accounting policies that the organization follows. Nothing really new here. We talk a little bit about the COVID-19 pandemic at the end here, risks and uncertainties on page 20. Note 3 provides a little bit of a detail about cash and investments. Note 4 talks about the capital assets. Note 5 talks about some property that was donated to the authority some time ago. Note 7 talks about the lines of credit and the new line of credit added this year. Talks a little bit about how that line of credit works, so where there's no balance on that line of credit. Note 8 talks about long-term debt. Note 9 talks about the pension plan, and that's where you can read a little bit more about those actuarial assumptions taken into account for the pension plan. Note 10 talks about post-employment benefits other than the pensions. Note 11 talks about restricted net position, and in that restricted net position being the bond reserve, debt service reserve, and that compensating balance account. Note 12 talks about some operating leases. Note 14 talks about contingencies. That's with respect to the federal awards, state awards. Note 15 talks about the payroll protection program. Note 16 provides a little bit of detail about the CARES Act airport grants. Moving on to note 17, talks about the Tiger grant, and then probably the most significant note in your financial statements is note 18, the fiscal viability note of the organization. Following this is some required supplementary information. This all has to do with your post-employment benefits and pension plan. Moving on here on page 43 is the independent auditor's report on internal control over financial reporting. So the purpose of this report is just to describe our scope of testing of internal control and the compliance and the results of those tests. There were no findings, no significant deficiencies or material weaknesses to report in this opinion. Moving on here is the your single audit report. On page 47, it talks about your schedule of expenditures of federal awards. There were about $7.4 million in federal awards that the authority expended this year. And with that, we selected a major federal program of the Highway Planning and Construction Program. And you'll also note that the authority did not qualify as a low-risk auditee. That's because there was no single audit that was performed last year. In order to be qualified as a low-risk auditee, you would need to have an audit performed every year. Then moving on here is the report to the board. The report to the board is just required communication between us, the auditors, and you, the board of directors. Within the report to the board, it's going to talk about significant accounting policies. There were no new accounting policies that were adopted this year. It's going to talk about accounting estimates and how accounting estimates are an integral part of the audit, and how we take into consideration management's estimates, things like collectability of receivables, useful lives of fixed assets, and then we test some of those estimates. It also talks about difficulties or the lack of difficulties encountered in performing the audit. There were no difficulties. It talks about corrected and uncorrected misstatements. There were no uncorrected misstatements this year. And it also talks about disagreements with management. There were no disagreements with management this year. It also talks about a management representation letter. Part of an audit is we have to have management's representation before we finalize the financial statement. So we will send that over to the authority as soon as we're done with the board meeting. And it also talks about consultations with other accountants, which to our knowledge, there are no consultations with other accountants. Within the report to the board also, it talks about some other matters. So it just talks about that OPEB liability, the required supplemental information with regard to that OPEB liability and the retirement, the pension plan. With that, are there any questions for us?
I have no questions. I think that the notes in support of the report are very informative. They're much more detailed than I've been able to fully absorb at this stage. But the presentation today, I think, is very encouraging in the sense that it shows accuracy of records and, a relatively sound financial practice because it was really a difficult year. So I plan to review the notes and try to more fully absorb what they tell me. I think, for instance, for us board members, the recapitulation of the history of the authorities that did this to New York State is really informative. And I appreciate the invitation. Thank you.
Cool.
I just want to thank Patty for fantastic financial work this past year, that we're able to come through with a nice clean audit that has everything in order, and we're making the most out of the situation that we're in, and I really appreciate your efforts and your diligence through all of it.
Jen? Ms. Bigman, you have any comments?
No
Yep.
comments.
Just, I guess, one quick comment that I'd like to make. The accounting's really come a long way. We develop an audit plan. We hope to execute the audit plan. You've got a really good, solid team internally. I think you guys, need to hear that from the auditors. We had great cooperation. You pointed out it was a tough year. Yeah, it was a tough year. All you need to do is look at your bridge revenue to see that. Having said that, the authority did, withstand it. The income statement looks a little strange because it's showing a massive bottom line, but that's basically because of the dollars that came through that were all put back into, the capital assets. We can only hope that, the border gets reopened in July, and life can go on. So, having said that, guys withstanded an absolutely brutal year. So, and from our standpoint, again, thank you to the internal team, because we can't do our work without, great cooperation on the inside. So thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to second that as well. Working with Patty and Steve was a pleasure this year.
Last year. It was kind of cranky last year. Remember, we got.
Well, that's good. That's good to hear. We appreciate those comments. I think some of us board members who've been around for a little while realize the difference the authority has now than in the past, and we appreciate the work that Patty and Steve and everyone else at the authority does. We're so much different than other agencies and authorities in the fact that we have 5 separate components, and when a major one like the revenue in the bridge just doesn't come through, it's tough for the other 4 to pick it up. But we've been fortunate with our friends in the New York State government and the federal government they've come through for us, and, we certainly thank them for it. And we thank you for all the work you've done on this audit, and, we appreciate, your clean opinion.
And I guess the last thing that I just wanted to say is, and I'm letting everybody know, this is my last dance. I am actually retiring from the firm. I know you're sitting there shocked saying, how can anyone so young possibly be retired? But yeah, 40 something years of doing this is, yeah, but you are in good hands. Next year you will have somebody else sitting in my chair. But the team is intact, and I've enjoyed working with you guys. So I just wanted to let you guys know that I am riding off into the sunset. So
Congratulations.
thank you.
Yeah, best wishes. Congrats.
Thank you.
Enjoy yourself.
Hope so. I got a bunch of grandkids, so that's the plan.
Anything else, from anyone? Joe or Ken, anything else?
Nothing here.
I'm good.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. So the presentation of the audit. Business items, general administration, A1, acceptance of the 2021-2022 audit. And that resolution is before you.
I have just one question.
2020 through 2021, right? What is it? Resolution.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Right? So what should it be?
2021, July 2021. It's the monthly.
Yeah, the audit.
Yeah, the audit itself. The resolution says acceptance of the 2020 through 2021 audit. Should that be something else? It's 2021. Should just say 2021. Yes.
Isn't it 2020 to 2021?
2020 to 2021.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what it said.
I thought you said 2022.
Oh, okay, nope.
Nothing wrong with that. Chris, you have a question?
Yeah, this is just back to a question. What does OPE stand for?
Other post-employee benefit. So it's anything other than retirement, insurances, things like that. And we hire an actuarial firm to do it. And they have all the
That's from my wonderful.
honorary associates. I think they're actually close to Buffalo.
I'm modestly confused about which one's doing what. This answers my question.
Yeah.
And it is, it's just a question. I'm trying to understand a little better some of the acronyms. I'd be prepared to make the motion to approve the resolution.
Okay, motion been made, is there a second?
I can second it, Tony.
Tony, thank you. We got you on the line, Tony, I'm glad you said something.
I'm here.
Motion been made and seconded. Any further discussion? Not Anne Marie, call the roll, please.
Ms. Terminelli?
Yes.
Mr. Coffin? Mr. Byrne?
Yes.
Ms. Quirk Pickman?
Yes.
Ms. Kennedy?
Yes.
Motion carried.
Next item on the agenda, A2, approval of selection of air service consultant. And before we do that, if you could bring that site up for us, that particular firm, is that possible?
that it right there? Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay.
We, discussed it, give you thoughts on, maybe I'm sure you've gone through it. Is there anything in that you might want to make reference to?
Well, this kind of goes with the way we approach other things in the other entities, and of course, a good example with our partnership with Almelsty. They have enormous knowledge about of what they do, and that would be marine, a marine operation of a terminal. And what I feel on the airport is that there's a lot of things that we have hunches about, and that we think we should be going in the right direction, but I don't think we have the solid knowledge of the landscape of what we're facing, especially after a pandemic year that we've just been through. So I reached out to a couple of consulting firms that deal with air service development, and I feel that I know when we met with the facilities committee, a lot of things came up and came about that really talked about what we should do next. And I just had a feeling, myself included, that I didn't really understand where we should go next, and I felt we need professional consulting firms to help us with that. So I did reach out to a number of firms. This one came highly recommended, and just after talking with them, I felt regionally they had an understanding of kind of where we were at, and also we came to an agreement that it's kind of easy to take on, just to kind of get a feel for what we're doing. And so, it's coming to you in the form of a retainer agreement that let's get to know each other, and kind of maybe with the discussion, we have a more focused idea of how we want to move forward. We can ask them to work in that, in that direction. So I just thought to commit ourselves to something long term right away without really knowing what we want. We worked out this retainer agreement. It doesn't rise to the dollar amount doesn't rise to the amount that I have to ask for really, but I know I've talked to a number of board members, and really the reason I'm bringing it to you, we need to talk about it, and we need to understand that we're making a commitment that could run into more money, but it's kind of easing into it. That's why we come to you with this retainer agreement. And part of that, what they would provide would be strategic planning and executive management consultation. And then probably most important would be strategic consultation regarding airport initiatives, and including air service development and activities. They also would help us in creation of policies and procedures. Example they give is like commercial leasing policies for airports, or a review of our standards out there. So as I was saying, with having a partner support, they also would have an idea of what else is being done out there that they can suggest to us, and probably get us more focused and more organized on how we treat things, especially when it revolves around income there, and just maybe to get us on the right path. I think too much we rely on the low cost carrier thing, and we thought that would just take us along. That we had Orlando and Tampa, and it was a very good thing at the time, but I think looking back, it didn't allow us to get into more depth on what we needed for revenue and things out there. So, you know, kind of maybe a reset and a reset of what we do at the airport, and hopefully move us forward and new things, and also things that we might not even be aware of that we can do out there. So, and the reason this all came about was just, you know, on my own, is a little bit of uncertainty of how to go in the future. So I need help. And I thought this would be the way to go about it as far as in relation to the airport. And Patty and I talked about it. You know, financially we can handle it.
Jen, you're on the facilities committee. Have you looked this over? Have you talked with Dave about this? I know we talked about it in committee, what may be our next way to approach what's going on at the airport. Do you have any thoughts or comments on this?
I don't. I apologize. I have not had communication with Dave about this. And I've looked at it. I've kind of skimmed it. I would just like to say, I mean, I do have full faith in Steve that, you know, he's really taken a close look at this. And, you know, I guess I just feel that if this is a, you know, a firm that can really get things going with our airport, just hopefully it will really pay off tenfold. But I have a hard time. I had a hard time hearing Steve. I'm sorry, but so if I'm repeating what you've already said, I'm sorry. I just feel like it's such an overwhelming, very expertise specific task that we really need some assistance. So I'm in full support. I think it's a good decision.
Good, thank you.
Yeah,
Mel?
I have to sign off. So I'm just going to say a quick goodbye to everybody. But we'll talk more about this. Okay. You know, at some point.
No, because we have Tony on there. You still here, Tony?
Yes, I'm here.
So Jen, if you were to vote, would you support this? In your opinion?
So,
Is this a good
ask me-
idea?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
I intend to support the resolution and vote for it. I am nervous about increasing costs, but because I know that as things are now running, we are continuing to survive at our present moment with grants and special support that's not routine. It's not all revenue. And I don't think anybody feels confident that the board is going to reopen in July. Nevertheless, I think that contracting for expert participation is a good idea, regardless of the COVID situation. I'd like to do that rather than adding the staff. And we will, in fact, need to consider adding staffing and to replace our marketing and development position. I think it's a very real consideration that may come up too. And what this all comes down to, I think, is if the border doesn't open, we're going to have to again depend on political sources for ongoing support. And I think that you are more in contact with those knowledgeable about whether that's a possibility than I am. But I don't think that we can, let's say, go 12 months without further support the border. And so I'm going to say, let's do what's good, assuming that there will be an opening of the border. And should the border not open again, should this variant take us over again, we're just gonna have to find a solution. You know, special times, special solutions. For the time being, let's do what makes sense and the assumption that we're headed back toward normal.
Yeah, and I think too, that when you talk about timing, it's month to month.
Yeah.
And probably, you know, without any pandemic, you might think of something more long term, but maybe if we start thinking that way, it goes the other way to where, okay, we're in really good shape if the border opens. We can continue with it, or at any point, but Patty and I are always on, I guess we've been conditioned over the last year that, you know, you almost get into short-term thinking because of finances, but that also can cut you off.
That's right. If we get too short-term thinking, we're going to find ourselves behind the eight ball.
And
when things open up.
And we will be later on, we'll be able to tell you about some of the things that, you know, you couldn't foresee, but this is probably short-term thinking that it's causing us, it's a good issue, but it's causing us things as far as development things go because of, you know, our financial situation, but also just the way the economy is going right now. There are things that I'd like to do, but I can see that almost happen. I think we're in a good spot here. I'm more positive about the border opening. So I think that, you know, this kind of what we're doing here will pay off.
Tony?
I am inclined to vote in favor of this because it is month to month. And I kind of just want to echo the sentiment of everyone. It seems, I mean, I think we should definitely be doing things to expand now that things are starting to open up. New York has definitely reached the vaccine threshold that we need. I think we should, keep planning towards the future. And I don't know if I'd be as inclined to do this if it were like a 12-month contract per se, but I think the fact that it is month to month, I think that, you know, that's kind of what's swaying my support for it, because we can't always say that this is working out if things would start to close again, or if it's months from now and the border's still not open.
Nicole?
I agree. I appreciate the fact that you've found and partnered with an agency, a consultant group that will allow us to enter into contracts on a month-by-month basis so we don't have long-term liability. I also think that it's super important to know that you have to make an investment in time, especially when you're making it in expertise, to make a profit or to earn some revenue. And as a new member to the board, correct me if I'm wrong, but the airport has never been a revenue generator for us. So any expertise that they can give, and I think I applaud you because I think that one of our strengths always is being able to see our own deficit and recognizing that we don't have expertise in the airport and that we need to get that from someplace else. We are in a very unique position here because in a very small radius of area, we do have several small regional airports. So I do think we need an outsider that can come in and provide. They've got the know-it-all or the wherewithal to have experienced many different airports with different sizes in many areas, and I think that they will be able to provide us with some strategic planning to help us move forward. And I'm sure that any suggestions or recommendations that they make, if we are able to finance and make those accommodations or recommendations, then I think that the revenue that we see in the long run will far surpass the pretty modest investment that we're making. So no, I think it's a great idea.
Good. I think, I don't know, I'm assuming everyone received the information from Stephanie on the load factors for June, July, August, June, July. The increase is quite significant. So we're heading in the right direction. People are flying again. I think we all know that across the country. But we can't survive, our airport can't survive on just what we're doing right now. So it needs to change. We need to do something different. I've had a call from someone that recommended this group too. We spoke highly of them. It's good to see they're a New York State company, so we're somewhat familiar with what's going on in our state. And since they're already in the airport business, as Nicole mentioned, they realize we're not the only small airport. So that's good. They have a general idea, I think, already of what's going on in our airport. It's funny, I've noticed in some of the airport conferences I've gone to, everybody knows what everybody else is doing. Nobody can hide anything from anybody. So these individuals that do airport consulting, they know a lot more than we think they do. With the understanding that we don't really know if we'll have a low-cost carrier here or not in the foreseeable future, we may need to go in a different direction. And I think with this firm, they may provide us with information on maybe where we should be looking instead of where we thought 2 years ago we were going, the direction we're going in. So I think we should give it a try. Always remembering that based on financial constraints, we may proceed for a while and then not able to, or hopefully the border opens up in the fall and travelers come across the bridge, both sides, and allows us to maybe do something different than what we've been able to do in the last 5 years. And we'll see.
And I'll just say one thing that maybe, okay, we go along for 2 or 3 months and we come upon something that we need more of their effort. That would be just an individual thing that we come to you on and say, we want to explore this, or we feel that, and they would have to sell it. I mean, maybe they sold me, but they would have to sell the board on what we're going to do, and it might be something we've never seen. But hopefully that would be something that that just after they present it makes sense. But I think if we're just on our own, kind of hit or miss on what we think and do the maybe the basics, we'll never know. We'll never know. We'll just go, well, we gave it our best effort, but it might have not have been as knowledgeable an effort that I'm first to admit it. I mean, I'm sure there's things out there that that I can learn, that we can learn, that will build a somewhat of a steady revenue in the future that is solid, that can withstand the ups and downs of how air travel goes. Sounds good.
So Steve, with that said, assuming that this gets approved this evening, when will they plan a meeting to come here?
One way, yeah, we'd like it first.
In person sooner rather than later, right?
Exactly.
We get that, we
Yeah,
really get our money's worth.
Right. They're saying, 20, 25 hours on there, but, with that introductory stuff probably is pretty important so that we understand and they understand what we're, and then they can create some excitement for us on some of the things that they've had. And it came highly recommended, so.
But I just sent 2 people from Yonkers up here to use 25 hours.
You've been there, right? Yeah. No, we went to consultants and stuff. How did you decide to share it? Yeah, we came, right. Well, we did do a Zoom call.
Would you keep us posted on a date? I would love to meet them.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah,
no,
for sure.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah, thank you.
This resolution is before us. Is there a motion?
I would make the motion.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. Any further discussion? If not, Anne Marie, call the roll, please.
Mr. Coffin,
Yes.
Mr. Byrne,
Yes.
Ms. Kennedy,
Yes.
Mr. Manelli,
Yes.
motion carried.
Thank you. So Laura, anything else on the agenda?
Move to executive session. I don't know.
All right,
Not that I was aware of.
I don't believe there. Tony? Anything you need for executive session?
No.
Okay. All right, any concluding comments from anyone? Is any press on the line?
No.
What? No press on the line? Hey, in light of that, again, our next regular board meeting is scheduled for July 15th at 4 p.m. Just wanna call. Chris, you still good?
Yeah, I'm good.
Tony, you still good?
Yes.
Okay. I am, Jen said she was. Okay, we don't know about that.
David will be there.
Okay, Megan?
I'd have to check.
You gotta get her enough clue.
I think she can come.
All right, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
I'll second.
Motion's been made and seconded. All those in favor of adjourning, say aye.
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 I
Opposed? We stand adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.